Part 1 of Works of Sallust. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mark Harrington. Works of Gaius Sallustius Crispus, translated by Alfred W. Pollard. Note on Sallust. The facts which we know about our author's life are sufficient to prove that he was at no time an important man at Rome. A member of a plebeian family, Gaius Sallustius Crispus was born in the year BC 86 in the town of Amiternum. Until BC 52, when he was one of the tribunes of the commons, we hear nothing of him, but he then took an active part against Cicero's client, Titus Annius Milo. 2 years later, he was removed from the Senate by the censors Appius Claudius and Lucius Calpurnius Piso, but his expulsion was probably only a party measure, as other Caesarians were similarly treated. And even if the story about his intrigue with a wife of Milo is true, adultery was, at this time, too common at Rome to exclude the offender from the Senate. It is said, without much authority, that immediately after his expulsion, Sallust joined the army of Caesar. Anyhow, in BC 48, we find him in command of a legion in Illyricum. The following year, he was one of the praetors elect. When he had been quaestor, we do not know, and thus regained his place in the Senate. In September, he was employed by Caesar to check the mutiny in Campania, but his efforts to do this were unsuccessful. Sallust took part in the African War, and on its conclusion was appointed the first governor of the newly formed province of Numidia. In BC 45, he returned to Rome, so enormously enriched as to give color to the charges of extortion which were vaguely, though probably never formally, brought against him. He now laid out the Horti Sallustiani in the valley between the Quirinal and the Pincius, and lived here in retirement until his death in BC 35. It is probable that these 10 or 12 years comprise the whole period of his literary activity, and that during them he wrote not only the Catiline and Jugurtha, but the other essays which were joined together into a continuous account of about 20 years of Roman history. On Sallust's death, his property all went to his grandnephew, who became a man of some note under Augustus and Tiberius. The story that the historian married Terentia, the wife whom Cicero divorced in BC 46, is worth mentioning, though the authority for it is not good, and it seems intrinsically impossible. The preceding brief sketch of Sallust's life enables us to gather that throughout his career he was a consistent Democrat and supporter of Caesar. This Caesarism is often alluded to as detracting from the value of his work, but it would be much truer to say that it constitutes his first qualification as a historian. There is a wrong and a right side in politics, as in everything else, and in the struggle which brought the Roman Republic to an end, the partisans of Caesar, as we now see, were in the right. It need not greatly alter our estimation of Cicero and Cato as men, or even as statesmen, that in that struggle they did battle for a constitution whose continuance would have been Rome's ruin. Their position was intelligible, consistent, justifiable, as it appeared in the heat of the contest, even noble, for they were fighting for an idea, and Caesar for his personal gain. But despite Cicero's literary power and Cato's force of character, a history of Rome for the century which followed the fall of Carthage, if written by either the one or the other, would have been a very lamentable production. They would have misunderstood everything, and consequently misexplained everything. The way in which Cicero alludes to the men and the events of the period of the Gracchi should be sufficient to convince us of this. Sallust, though vastly inferior as a man to either of the Optimate leaders, was extraordinarily successful in seizing the thread of events. The chapters on politics in Rome in the year which succeeded the Gracchian Revolution, and again after the consulship of Pompey and Crassus in BC 70, can hardly be too highly praised, especially when we consider how soon after the events narrated they were written. Sallust, indeed, except when speaking of the dictator himself, never allowed his Caesarian sympathies to carry him away, and it is difficult to understand how Professor Mommsen could permit himself to speak of the Catiline and Jugurtha as partisan pamphlets. If Sallust was a party writer, then Defoe himself must yield him the palm for cleverness in concealing his real object, and one could almost wish Mommsen's theory correct, for the ingenuity of the elaborate contrast which Sallust draws between Caesar and Marcus Cato, the one man for whom the dictator entertained an uneasy hate, would then be without a parallel. But the whole tone of Sallust's two essays forbids the idea that he was writing for any immediate purpose. The elaborate care bestowed on the style, the recurring pompousness, the affectation of an extraordinary virtue, all betray the vanity of a man who wrote with Thucydides to be an everlasting possession ringing in his ears, and who probably esteemed his own work little less lightly than that of Caesar. Over passages in the latter's career which he might not care to have revived, Sallust was sufficiently prudent to draw a veil. The different manner in which he alludes to the rumors of the complicity of Caesar and of Crassus in Catiline's conspiracy is an instance of this, and certainly we should never have learnt from our author how close was the political connection of Catiline and Caesar down to the end of 64. But when not dealing with the dangerous subject of the dictator's conduct, it is difficult to find any trace of partiality in Sallust. Allusion has already been made to his character of Cato. A like impartiality marks his sketches of Metellus, of Marius, and of Sulla, and there is hardly a single passage in the two essays he has left us in which one political party is unjustly exalted at the expense of the other. So far we have been dealing with Sallust as a political historian, and here there is little to do but praise. There are, however, other aspects of his work in which it appears less satisfactory. Of his defects as a military historian, and of the excuses which may be alleged for such defects, something is said in the introduction to the Jugurtha. His contempt for details of chronology and geography forms the subject of many of the notes. Neither of these points, therefore, need be more than alluded to here. There is, however, another side of his writings on which a few remarks may, perhaps, be profitably made. If by the pains which he takes to link together events and their causes, and to find the key of each period of history in that which preceded it, our author has justly earned himself the title of a philosophic historian, it must unhappily be added that by the way in which he draws on his imagination, he exhibits himself as the earliest of historical novelists. It has been remarked that there are often two ways in which the same set of facts may be described. We may say that we saw a man snatch up a stick and strike a dog, or that we knew the man was angry and resolved to punish the dog. In very simple cases, it does not much matter which form of expression we use. Sallust, however, has a perverse propensity for using the second form where it is entirely inapplicable. To speak pedantically, he interprets material in terms of mental phenomena in a most illegitimate manner, and often seems to do this merely to conceal his ignorance of some historical detail. He is constantly supplying motives and reasons, constantly telling us what his characters thought, and describing mental conditions of which he could by no possibility have known anything. In the history of the Jugurthan War, the effect of this is chiefly ludicrous. The elaborate account of Micipsa's motives in sending Jugurtha to Numantia, the ascription of Hiempsal's murder to the terror he caused Jugurtha by his supposed remark, the mental pictures of the Numidian and his opponents presented to us on each change of tactics on either side, all these we may value as highly or as cheaply as we like. However we rate them, they will not alter our views as to the nature of the war. In the case of the Catiline, it is different. Here much depends on the opinion we hold as to the personal character of the conspirator. And Sallust, in his foolish straining after effect, has perhaps done more even than Cicero to elevate Catiline into the portentous stage villain with whom we are familiar. to trace the conspiracy to the madness which resulted from a guilty conscience, to portray the man whom Caesar and Crassus supported for the consulship as a kind of dissolute maniac, to say that he had made his followers commit aimless crimes in order to keep themselves in practice, to alter the date of a speech in order to give the conspirator an effective exit from the Senate House, to introduce some foolish talk about the Roman women as an excuse for a dashing sketch of Sempronia. All this is characteristic of an historical novelist, not of a philosophic historian. It detracts from the value of Sallust's work. It makes us receive his statements with suspicion and treat his soberer judgments of men and things with less attention than they deserve. Enough, however, has been said as to Sallust's defects, especially as in the notes, from the nature of the case, it is chiefly to his defects that attention is called. He may not be the equal of Herodotus, Thucydides, and Tacitus, but by his combination of excellence of style and of matter, he is at least worthy to be ranked in the same class with them. End of Note on Sallust.